A nagging thought took root in my mind, creeping in quietly at first, but gradually growing louder and more persistent. It seemed to settle in the corners of my thoughts, refusing to be ignored or pushed aside. No matter how hard I tried to focus on something else, it lingered, an unsettling presence that wouldn't let go, continuously tugging at the edges of my consciousness. It wasn't something I could easily explain, but it gnawed at me quietly, like an invisible thread I couldn't untangle. My husband, David, and I had been married for 15 years. We had our fair share of highs and lows, as any couple does, but for the most part, I thought we were happy. We had a home, a daughter, and a life that felt comfortable and secure. Our daughter, Sophia, was growing up into a confident young woman, surrounded by a group of close-knit friends. I was proud of her, and I did everything I could to make sure her friends felt like family when they came over to visit. They would laugh, joke, and hang out for hours on weekends, filling our home with their youthful energy. It was always a joy to have them around. But then there would all started with an unsettling feeling as Olivia. Olivia was a part of that group of friends, and I couldn't help but feel uneasy every time she came over. On the surface, she seemed like the perfect friend, polite, well-mannered, and always with a smile that was both warm and genuine. Sophia adored her, and Olivia, in return, treated our family with kindness and respect. But there was something about the way David looked at Olivia that made my stomach twist in knots. It wasn't overt, not in any obvious way, but it was a look that lingered just a bit too long. His eyes would follow her movements when she walked into the room, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more behind that gaze than I was willing to admit to myself. I tried to dismiss the thought, chalking it up to my own paranoia. After all, Olivia was just a young girl who saw us as her second family. What harm could there be in that? But as time went on, the uneasy feeling grew stronger. I began to notice the little things, small gestures, fleeting moments that, first, seemed insignificant. David would casually ask Sophia, "Is Olivia coming over today?" Or, "Have you invited Olivia for dinner?" His voice always carried a subtle hint of eagerness, as though he were more excited about her arrival than I would have expected from a father simply concerned about his daughter's friends. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the frequency of those questions began to raise alarms in my mind. First, I dismissed it. Perhaps I was just overanalyzing things. Maybe David simply enjoyed having Olivia around, or perhaps he was just being friendly. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the nagging suspicion that something was off. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. After all, Olivia was just Sophia's friend, a girl who saw us as a surrogate family, who didn't have much else to hold on to in her own life. But the more I watched David, the more his actions seemed to betray a deeper level of interest. It was as if Olivia had become an integral part of our daily life. And David, though trying to seem casual, was always finding reasons to invite her over. "We should have Olivia for dinner again this weekend," he'd suggest, almost like he was trying to make her feel like a permanent part of our family circle. The way his eyes lit up when she entered the room, how he seemed to hang on to her every word when she laughed or spoke, it was all becoming too much for me to ignore. Sophia, of course, was oblivious. To her, Olivia was simply her best friend, and she loved having her around. She was thrilled whenever David suggested inviting Olivia over, interpreting it as a sign of how much we all liked her. And yet, with every smile and every moment they shared, I couldn't shake the sense that David's interest in Olivia was going beyond mere friendship. It felt as though he was trying to weave her into the very fabric of our family, as if she were something more than just a guest in our home. I began to notice the quiet conversations they'd share, low, private whispers when they thought no one was listening, the way they would lean in closer to each other, as if trying to keep their conversation a secret. When I entered the room, they'd suddenly stop talking, laughing awkwardly or changing the subject as if nothing had happened. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that I was overthinking everything. But deep down, a dark suspicion began to take root. The small signs, the odd glances, the way David seemed to go out of his way to make Olivia feel comfortable in our home, all of it was beginning to paint a picture I wasn't ready to face. Then, one evening, when I found myself sitting alone in our bedroom, I could no longer ignore the feeling that had taken hold of me, the quiet whispering of doubt, the growing tension in my chest. It had all reached a breaking point. I could no longer pretend that everything was fine. I needed answers. I had to confront David. When I walked into the living room, David was sitting on the couch, reading the newspaper. I approached him, my heart pounding in my chest. "David," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "is there something going on between you and Olivia?" His reaction was immediate. He looked up at me, his face a mask of shock and anger. "What are you talking about?" he snapped, his voice harsh. "Are you out of your mind? She's just a kid. How could you even think something so disgusting?" The words stung, and for a moment, I felt small, embarrassed, even ashamed for questioning him. Perhaps I was overreacting. Maybe I had let my doubts cloud my judgment. But as he stormed off, muttering something under his breath, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had touched a nerve. In the days that followed, David became noticeably more cautious around Olivia. He seemed more aware of his actions, more reserved, but the tension remained, hanging in the air like an unspoken truth. I couldn't stop watching him, observing his every move, every interaction. There was something different now, something that didn't feel quite right. The doubt that had been gnawing at me grew into something stronger, something more obsessive. I couldn't let it go, not now, not after everything I had seen. I needed proof. I needed to know once and for all what was really happening when I wasn't around. The thought of not knowing, of letting this uncertainty linger, was unbearable. It wasn't that I didn't trust David. I had trusted him for years. But trust alone wasn't enough to silence the questions that echoed in my mind. So, I made a decision. It was a choice I wasn't proud of, but one I felt I had no other option but to make. I went out and bought a tiny camera small enough to hide, discreet enough that no one would ever notice. I knew it was wrong, that it was a betrayal in itself, but the fear of never knowing the truth was too much to bear. I needed to see what was really going on when I wasn't there to watch. My heart raced as I set up the camera, the weight of my decision pressing down on me with every passing moment. Would I find the answers I was looking for? Or would the truth be even harder to face than the doubts I had already conjured in my mind? I chose the one that could capture every detail, even in places with poor lighting. It was small enough to be hidden in a corner, out of sight, where no one would think to look. I held it in my hands for what felt like an eternity before leaving the store, my fingers gripping it tightly, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I was nervous, but also strangely determined, knowing I had no other option. The drive home felt longer than usual, my thoughts swirling in a chaotic mix of doubt and resolve. Was this really the right decision? Was I about to cross a line that I could never uncross? These questions echoed in my mind as I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. But then, I thought about the sleepless nights, the constant gnawing anxiety that had kept me awake, the moments I spent pacing, wondering, imagining all the things that could be true but with no way to be sure. Could I keep living in this agonizing uncertainty? No, I couldn't. I had to know the truth, whatever it might be. That night, after David fell into a deep sleep, I moved with quiet determination. I positioned the camera in a place that would allow it to record everything happening in our living room. The spot I chose was so well hidden that even the most meticulous observer wouldn't have noticed it. My hands trembled slightly as I set it up, but I kept going, each action fueled by the desperate need for answers. This was the only way I could see the truth. I told myself over and over again that whatever the footage revealed, it would bring me peace of mind. At least then, I would know. No more wondering, no more sleepless nights. I left the camera running and retreated to my own space, my heart pounding in my chest. The next few days felt like an eternity as I went about my routine, pretending everything was normal. But each night, I sat alone, watching the footage, feeling a creeping sense of guilt wash over me. It was like I was watching myself from the outside, an intruder in my own home, spying on my family. First, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. David sat on the couch, flipping through channels, looking entirely like his usual self. Olivia, my daughter's close friend, came into the room, and they started chatting and laughing together. I kept telling myself that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe there was nothing happening. Perhaps I had imagined the whole thing. But as I kept watching, a sinking feeling began to grow in the pit of my stomach. Something wasn't right. Then, there was a shift. I noticed it in the way they were looking at each other. It wasn't just friendly laughter anymore. Their eyes were softer, lingering on each other in a way that felt intimate. I could feel a chill running down my spine as David's hand reached out to touch Olivia's. First, it was just a fleeting brush, almost like an accident, but instead of pulling back, his hand stayed there, resting gently on hers. Olivia didn't withdraw either. She let her fingers curl around his, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. I couldn't breathe. Time seemed to stretch, each second dragging on as I watched their faces come closer, their laughter dying down, replaced by something deeper, something more intense. I watched in horror as they leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss. It wasn't a kiss of friendship, or a kiss of innocent affection. It was real, passionate, undeniable. My worst fears had come true. There it was, in black and white, the proof I had been dreading. It felt as though the ground had been ripped from under me, like I was watching a nightmare unfold in front of my very eyes. My world, the life I thought I knew, began to crumble. My husband, the man I had trusted, the father of our child, had betrayed me in the most unforgivable way. I didn't sleep that night. My mind raced with anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. How could he do this? With someone so close to our family? How could he betray me, betray us, in such a cruel and heartless way? I was drowning in a sea of emotions, each one crashing over me with unrelenting force. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart heavy with the weight of what I had just seen. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Confrontation was inevitable. I had to face him. But how? How could I even begin to process this, let alone confront him with it? The next morning, I made a conscious decision. I would keep calm, act as though nothing had changed, and give myself time to think. I needed a plan. I couldn't let my emotions dictate my actions. I needed to be strong, prepared for whatever came next. So, I spent the day with Sophia, my daughter, acting as though everything was perfectly fine. But inside, I was falling apart. How could I protect her from this ugly truth? How would I explain to her that her father was capable of such betrayal? The thought of her being hurt, of her world being shattered, was unbearable. That evening, after Sophia had gone to bed, I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront David. I sat him down and played the footage, silently watching his face as the reality of what he had done began to sink in. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to guilt. He stammered, tried to deny it at first, but there was no escaping the truth. His face said it all: the shame, the regret, the realization that his actions had consequences. He mumbled something about making a mistake, about being sorry, but I didn't want to hear it. His words felt empty, like a hollow attempt to fix something that couldn't be fixed. How could he think a simple apology would make this go away? How could he believe that the damage he had caused could be erased with a few empty promises? I was too hurt, too broken to care about his apologies. I want answers, I said, my voice trembling with the weight of everything I was feeling. I need to know why. Why did you do this to me? To us? He couldn't answer. Not really. There were no words that could justify his actions. And as I watched him struggle to find the right thing to say, I realized that there was no repairing this, no going back. The trust we had shared, the life we had built together, it was all shattered beyond recognition. Excuses. I found myself constantly asking how he could look at me, the woman he had once vowed to cherish, and lie with such ease. How could he betray not only me but our entire family? How could he so casually destroy everything we had built together? As the days passed, the turmoil inside me only grew. It was as if my entire world had shifted beneath me, and I struggled to hold on to any sense of stability. Every time I looked at David, I couldn't help but question whether I had ever truly known him at all, Was the man I had married, the man I had loved, just a mask for the person he had really been? Our marriage had been founded on trust. Or at least I had believed it was. I had always thought that trust was the cornerstone of our bond. But now, it seemed that the foundation of our entire relationship had been a fragile illusion, built on lies and deceit. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of emotions, anger, confusion, sorrow, and I couldn't seem to find the shore. I began to withdraw from him, from everything. It was easier to retreat into myself than to face the constant ache in my chest. I spent more and more time away from the house. Long aimless drives became my escape, a way to clear my head and quiet the chaos in my heart. I would tell myself that maybe, just maybe, I could find some semblance of peace in the vast stretches of open road. But whenever I returned home, I was confronted with the painful reality of what had happened, what he had done. One evening, as I was out, I found myself unable to bear the weight of the secret any longer. The shame, the hurt, the crushing burden of what I had discovered. It was all too much to carry alone. I needed someone to confide in, someone who would listen without judgment, someone who could help me navigate the overwhelming storm inside me. And so, I reached out to Clara. She was a friend I had known for years, someone whose judgment I trusted deeply. When I finally told her everything, I expected her to be shocked, and she was. But what struck me most was the compassion in her eyes as she listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer solutions. She simply let me speak. And when I was finished, she took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring, as if to remind me that I wasn't alone in my pain. "You deserve better than this, my dear," she said softly, her voice laced with genuine empathy. "You don't have to make any decisions right now. But remember this, you deserve to be happy. You deserve respect. And you don't have to settle for anything less than that." Her words, simple as they were, pierced through the fog of my emotions. They gave me a small, fragile sense of strength, just enough to begin to think about what I truly wanted. Not just for myself, but for Sophia as well. Clara's support was like a lifeline, and for the first time in days, I began to feel a glimmer of hope, even if it was just the faintest flicker. Meanwhile, David continued his attempts at reconciliation. He would leave small notes around the house, reminders of the good times we had shared, our laughter, our love. Each note, however, only deepened the wound. It felt as though he was trying to erase the truth, pretending as though everything could simply return to how it was before. But I couldn't forget. Each note felt like salt in an open wound, a constant reminder of the lies he had told and the betrayal that had shattered our lives. It was as though he wanted to rewrite the story of our marriage, but I could no longer see the same narrative. One evening, as I sat in our bedroom, David came in and sat beside me. His presence, once comforting, now felt foreign, unsettling. His voice was barely a whisper when he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, his eyes filled with regret and guilt. "I know I hurt you in a way that may never be fixed, but please, give me a chance to make things right." I turned to face him, but all I felt was a cold, biting anger. How could he even ask me that? "How can you say that?" I replied, my voice sharp, the pain bubbling up. "You didn't just betray me, David. You betrayed our family. You betrayed Sophia. You betrayed everything we've built together." The silence that followed was suffocating. His apology felt hollow, a desperate plea from a man who had broken everything and now wanted to glue the pieces back together with empty words. That night, I realized that I couldn't continue pretending that things could go back to normal, pretending that we could just pick up where we had left off. After that night, I knew I needed to seek help. I started seeing a counselor, someone who could help me untangle the web of emotions that had taken over my life. I needed someone to guide me through the pain, to help me understand that healing was a slow and nonlinear process. My counselor helped me realize that I didn't have to rush to make any decisions, that there was no timeline for healing, and that I had the right to take as much time as I needed. The counseling sessions became a sanctuary for me, a place where I could unpack my emotions without fear of judgment. Slowly, I began to see a path forward, one that didn't rely on the past or on David's promises to change. The more I spoke, the clearer it became that healing would require more than just time. It would require a shift in how I saw myself and my future. But healing was not without its challenges. Sophia, my precious daughter, could sense that something had shifted between her father and me. She became quieter, more withdrawn, as though she could feel the tension in the air. One evening, she came to me, concern written all over her face. "Mom, are you and Dad okay? You've both been acting so different," she asked, her voice small and uncertain. I didn't want to burden her with the details of our struggles, but I also couldn't lie to her. "We're just going through a rough time, sweetheart," I said gently, trying to offer her reassurance, though it was hard to convince myself. "But remember, no matter what happens, we both love you very much." She nodded, but the worry in her eyes lingered. It broke my heart to see her so concerned, and I knew that the road ahead would be difficult for all of us. Still, I believed that shielding her from the full truth, at least for now, was the right choice. As the weeks passed, I found myself grappling with an impossible question. Should I end the marriage? Part of me longed to break free, to escape the suffocating weight of betrayal and rebuild my life from the ashes. But another part of me hesitated, worried about what that decision would mean for Sophia, for the family we had once been. Divorce seemed like a final act, a decision that would irreversibly change everything. It felt like a decision I couldn't make in haste, not with so much at stake. I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing: whatever I decided, I had to be true to myself. I had to take the time to rebuild, to heal, and to become the person I was meant to be, even if that meant walking away from everything I had once known. Clara continued to be an unwavering source of support during one of the most turbulent times of my life. She had a unique way of cutting through the chaos of my thoughts and bringing clarity when I was drowning in confusion. She would often remind me that, above all, the choice I made had to be for my own peace and happiness. "You can't stay in a marriage just because you're afraid of the fallout," she said one afternoon, her voice both firm and compassionate. "You owe it to yourself to seek the life you deserve, no matter how hard it may seem." Her words echoed in my mind long after she left, reverberating through the silence that filled my heart. They were a reminder that I had the power to take control of my life, to make decisions that would lead me to peace. The more I reflected on her advice, the more I realized how deeply I had been suppressing my own needs. I had been living for everyone else: my husband, my daughter, even my friends, but never for myself. Clara's voice became a steady beacon, pushing me to look inward, to examine who I had become and who I wanted to be. One quiet evening, I found myself standing before the mirror, staring at my reflection. The woman looking back at me was someone I hardly recognized. I had been shattered, broken by the weight of betrayal, yet there was a flicker of something more, a faint glimmer of the woman I had once been, the woman who was strong, who was capable of resilience, who had dreams and desires outside of her roles as a wife and mother. In that moment, I understood that no matter what the future held with David, I needed to find my way back to myself. I needed to reconnect with the woman I had lost along the way. With a surge of newfound determination, I made a promise to myself. I would reclaim my life. I enrolled in a painting class, something I had always wanted to try but had put off for years. I reached out to old friends I hadn't seen in ages, rediscovering the joy of shared laughter and conversations that didn't revolve around responsibilities or obligations. I spent weekends exploring nature, taking long walks in the park, and simply breathing in the world around me. Slowly, the pieces of me that had been scattered began to come back together. I felt alive again, as if I were awakening from a long, painful slumber. But the journey wasn't linear. Some days, the weight of everything still pressed down on me, and I struggled to breathe through the heaviness. Other times, I found myself caught in moments of doubt, wondering if I had made the right choice. It was during those moments of uncertainty that David and I would share a quiet, strained silence. One evening, as we sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken words, David finally broke. His voice cracked, and tears streamed down his face as he confessed the depth of his guilt and regret. "I destroyed everything," he whispered. his hands shaking. I let a moment of weakness ruin the most precious thing in my life, our family. I sat there, listening, as his words washed over me. He pleaded for my forgiveness, his voice filled with shame. But deep down, I knew that forgiveness wouldn't erase the past. It couldn't undo the betrayal, the hurt, the years of broken trust. I had already made up my mind. I need time, I said softly but firmly. I need space to heal. I'm not ready to make any promises, but I am ready to let go of the anger. I need to focus on my own path now. My heart ached as I spoke, but there was no turning back. It was time to start living for myself. A few months later, after many sleepless nights and countless tears, I filed for separation. It was one of the hardest decisions I had ever made. The weight of it was immense, the loss, the uncertainty, the fear of what the future might hold. But beneath it all, there was a sense of relief. I knew I had made the best choice for me, for my own healing. I needed space to rebuild my life, free from the shadows of betrayal that had been cast over me. When I told Sophie about the separation, my heart broke for her. She was devastated, confused, and scared. I sat her down gently, trying to explain in a way that she could understand. Sophia, your father and I love you more than anything in this world. I told her, my voice thick with emotion. You will always be our top priority, no matter what happens between us. This is not about you. It's about two people who need to take time to heal. It was the hardest conversation I had ever had, but in the end, it brought us closer. We cried together, holding on to each other as if our bond could shield us from the pain. In the months that followed, I began to feel a sense of peace, a calm that had eluded me for so long. The separation allowed me to focus on my own happiness, on finding joy in the small things again. I threw myself into my work, into my hobbies, and into being the best mother I could be for Sophia. I rediscovered the simple pleasures of life, the warmth of the sun on my face, the sound of laughter shared with friends, the quiet moments of reflection that helped me reconnect with myself. I learned to trust myself again, to honor my own needs, and to find strength in the woman I was becoming. As time passed, David and I reached a point of mutual understanding. We came to accept that our paths had diverged, and that we were no longer meant to be together as a couple. But we had a responsibility to Sophia, and that was something we could both agree on. We made a commitment to co-parent with love, respect, and patience, putting her needs first. The anger that once burned so brightly between us slowly faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance of the choices we had each made. It wasn't easy, but it was the best we could do. And in the end, it brought me peace. Looking back, I realized how much the betrayal had changed me. It had shattered me in ways I never thought possible, but it also gave me the opportunity to rebuild stronger, wiser, and more resilient than before. I had found a way to rise from the pain, to reclaim my life, and to rediscover the woman I had lost. I was no longer just a wife or a mother. I was a woman with dreams, with strength, with the ability to stand on my own 2 feet. The journey had been incredibly painful, but it had also been empowering. I had learned to trust myself again, to believe in my own worth, and to see my own potential. I no longer feared the unknown because I knew I was capable of facing whatever challenges life would throw at me. I had given myself the greatest gift of all, the freedom to live authentically, to embrace the future with hope and confidence, and to believe in my own strength.